opening words are from Dana Foltz, who is a master yoga teacher and a poet. There is a quality of stillness so rare that the air shimmers in its presence. It's there between our eyes. It vibrates with the music of life. It dances in the wind, breaks forth from the trees into a clearing just as the sun rises, and then settles into silence again. There is a quality of stillness so rare that I am bared to the very marrow of my bones before it. May I choose never to be clothed again. And now I invite you to rise in body or in spirit for the lighting of our chalice. Please join me in the words of affirmation printed in this morning's program. We light this chalice for all who are here and for all who are not, for all those who have ever walked through our doors, and for those who may yet find this spiritual home, even for those we cannot at this moment even imagine. For each of us and for all of us, may this flame burn warm and bright. And any children who are with us this morning, I invite you to come forward for the message for all ages. Kelly was telling me last week that the kids are kind of shy this summer. That's probably because there's not so many of you. That'll change in a couple of weeks. It's going to be full up here. So this is a story called The Seeds of Peace, and you'll be able to see some of the illustrations up on the screen. High up in the mountains, an old hermit lived in a rocky cave. You know what a hermit is? A hermit is someone that lives all by themselves. They don't live around other people. The hermit's home was colored by the end of a rainbow. Rainbow stopped at his cave. And every day the hermit would sit on his rock and watch the colors play over the valley and disappear into a land far, far away. One day a young man appeared riding a silver horse. He stopped beside that old hermit and said, "Old man, I am looking for the end of the rainbow." The hermit smiled at him and said, "Where the rainbow touches my cave, that's where it ends." The young rider was shocked. He looked at the hermit's barren home and said, "I live at the other end of the rainbow, but over there is this big mansion that is full of treasure. What treasures lie here on the other end of the rainbow?" "Peace and happiness," said the hermit. Peace and happiness. Well, the young rider was disappointed in the hermit's answer. Not finding the treasure that he had expected, he followed the rainbow all the way back to the other end of the valleys. Now, over the years, as the years passed, this young rider became very, very wealthy. He became a very successful merchant. And now he lived in that rainbow mansion at the other side of the rainbow, and he filled up the mansion with even more treasures. But although he was very, very rich, he was not happy. One day he was sitting alone in his big office, and he remembered the hermit and what he had said years earlier. Perhaps he thought to himself, "He can bring me the happiness and the peace that I really need." Well, the hermit did not want to leave his cave, but when the merchant sent a message and summoned him to come, he put on his best rags and walked to the other end of the rainbow. The merchant was pleased now to have the old man in the comfort of his mansion. He gave him the best room in the place, with a bed with silken sheets. But the old man, he wasn't comfortable sleeping in that wonderful bed. And so each night after the lights were out, he would slip away into the garden, and he'd sleep between the roots of a big, gentle tree. Well, the merchant the next day offered his guest the richest food and the finest wines that he had in his wine cellar. But the old man didn't like these. Instead, he crept out to the garden and he picked the fruits off the trees and he drank from a little stream of clear running water. And the merchant also invited to his mansion great thinkers and important teachers to converse with the old hermit. But the hermit was a simple man, and he crept away back to the garden to talk to the creatures who visited there. The great thinkers and the important teachers were so busy trying to impress each other that they hardly noticed that the hermit was gone. Well, one day the merchant went for a walk in the garden, and he found the hermit sitting under the gentle tree and chattering away with the animals. "Old hermit," he asked, "why do you not sleep in the room that I have given you on that wonderful soft bed with silken sheets?" The hermit said, "All of my life I have slept in the arms of nature. I do not fear her darkness, and her nighttime whispers, they give me good dreams." The merchant didn't understand what the old hermit was saying. "But why don't you eat the excellent food and drink that I offer you?" he said. And the hermit smiled and said, "By eating just a little bit of simple foods like fruit, I can taste the goodness that grows out of the earth, and the clear spring water does not make me feel kind of giddy in the head so that I say foolish things." The merchant was puzzled by these answers, and he asked again, "Why do you talk to all these silly creatures out here and ignore the wise men that I have invited to converse with you?" The hermit looked at the animals gathered around him and said, "All the creatures of the world have something important to say. It does not mean they are fools simply because they like to live a simple life." After this last answer, the merchant went back to his office, and he said to himself, "I asked the hermit to come here to bring me peace and happiness, but instead he speaks to me in all these words that I simply cannot understand." And then after a while, he called the hermit into his office. "Can you bring me peace?" he asked the hermit. "I cannot," the hermit replied. "Can you make me happy?" said the merchant. "No, I cannot," said the hermit. "Why not?" asked the merchant with a sad expression. The hermit looked very closely at the merchant and said, "Peace has to come from within you. Peace is like a seed. You cannot force it to grow. You cannot shape it into something that you want it to be. You must give it love and freedom so that it can grow from inside of you into something pure and beautiful. Only then are you going to know true happiness." The merchant was silent for a while, and then he asked, "How do I start? How do I start planting that seed?" And the old man said, "Well, the first thing you must do is let me go back to the cave that I love and where I belong." And so the hermit was allowed to go back to the cave to sit beneath the falling colors of the end of the rainbow, and with a satisfied smile, the hermit would look out across the valleys to the other end of the rainbow and know that the seeds of peace were beginning to grow there. And so we continue our service with this selection from Annie Dillard's classic, Pilgrim at Tinker Creek. Learning to stalk muskrats took me several years, but what happened that particular night was not only the ultimate in human intrusion, the limit beyond which I am certain I cannot go. I would never have imagined that I could go that far, actually, to sit beside a feeding muskrat as beside a dinner partner at a crowded table. When I first spotted him, he was busily engaged in harvesting reeds and swimming with them back through the stream to his den. And having apparently catched the reeds, he repeated the same routine in a very businesslike fashion, swimming back again with a hefty mouthful. But then I lost sight of him for a minute when he went under the bridge. He did not come out where I expected him to be, but suddenly, and to my utter disbelief, he appeared right there on the bank next to me. There I was, and there he was, right by my side. I could have touched him with the palm of my hand without stretching out my elbow. He gathered mouthfuls of grass and clover, less by gnawing than by biting hard next to the ground, locking his neck muscles, pushing up jerkily with his forelegs. In the 40 minutes that I watched him, he never saw me, smelled me, or heard me at all. When he was in full view, of course, I never moved except to breathe. Only once, when he was feeding from the opposite bank, about 8 feet away from me, did he suddenly rise upright, all alert. But then he immediately began foraging again. He never knew I was there. I never knew I was there either. For 40 minutes that night, I was as purely sensitive and mute as a photographic plate. I received impressions, but I did not print out captions. My own self-awareness had disappeared. It seems now that almost as though if I had been wired with electrodes, my EEG would be flat. I have done this sort of thing so often, losing self-consciousness, moving slowly, halting suddenly, that it's become almost second nature to me. And I have often noticed that even a few minutes of this self-forgetfulness is tremendously invigorating. You know, I wonder if we don't waste much of our energy just by saying hello to ourselves over and over again. Now, Martin Buber quotes an old Hasid master who said, "When you walk across the fields with your mind pure and holy, then from all the stones and all the growing things and all the animals, the sparks of their soul come out and cling to you. And then they are purified, and they become a holy fire in you." Now, I've tried to show muskrats to other people, but it very seldom works. No matter how quiet we are, the muskrats, they just stay hidden, out of sight. Maybe they sense the hum of our consciousness, the buzz from two humans who in the silence cannot help but be aware of each other and so also of themselves. Can I stay still? How still? It's astonishing how many people cannot or will not hold still. I could not or would not hold still for 30 minutes inside my cabin. But down by the creek, I slow down. I center down. I empty out. In my brain, I'm not saying, muskrat, 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 there. I say nothing. I go calm. I find balance and repose. I retreat, not inside myself, but outside myself, so that I am a tissue of senses. Whatever I see out there is plenty, abundance. I'm skin of the water that the wind plays over. I am petal and feather and stone. The second selection is from the beat poet Allen Ginsberg. Too much industry, too much eats, too much beer, too much cigarettes, too much philosophy, too many thought forms, not enough rooms, not enough trees. Too much police, too much computers, too much hi-fi, too much pork. Too much coffee, too much smoking. Under gray roofs, too much obedience. Too many bellies, too many business suits, too much paperwork, too many magazines. Too much old murder, too much white torture. Too much one Stamheim, too many happy Nazis. Too many crazy students, not enough farms, not enough apple trees, not enough nut trees. Too much money, too many poor, Turks without vote, guests do the work. Too much metal, too much fat, too many jokes, not enough meditation. Our family took few real vacations during my childhood. In her profession as an occupational therapist, my mother didn't have a great deal of time off in the 50s and the 60s. And as an independent farmer, my father and we kids had fields and livestock that needed near constant attention. And so in most years, our summer treat was a day trip to the south side of Chicago for a Sunday doubleheader at Old Comiskey Park. I retain fond memories of those trips. There was lunch in the sheltered picnic area beneath the left field bleachers. There was watching legendary White Sox players like Minnie Minoso and Early Wynn, whose hitting and pitching records I practically knew by heart. There were those hot dogs with mustard. Ballpark is where I learned to like mustard. And then there was, of course, luxuriating in a day in which I was utterly free of responsibilities. So fast forward to Father's Day 2015. Trina and I were spending a couple of nights in the Twin Cities where our son Kyle lives and works. And the two of us usually plan some sort of father-son activity on Father's Day. And a few weeks earlier, it had struck me, unexpectedly, that what I'd really like to do was take in a baseball game. I checked the schedule, and yes, the Minnesota Twins were in the midst of a homestand. And as luck would have it, their opponent that night, Chicago White Sox. Now, we had not been to a major league game since Kyle was 12, and we went to see the Brewers a time or two in Milwaukee's venerable County Stadium. Now, the Twins these days play at Target Field, an impressive new park in the heart of downtown Minneapolis. And we enjoyed ourselves enough that night that I bought tickets for another game 6 weeks later. George Vacancy is a former sports writer for the New York Times, and he has written that baseball has a timeless feel to it, as if it had always been there. And that is because, he says, the game is unfettered by the tyranny of the stopwatch. What else can you do at a ballpark but chatter for 2 or 3 or 4 hours? You know, in rural America, people sat on their front porches and whittled with their knives and talked to each other. In ballparks, fans, players, commentators still have time to play with words and ideas and good memories. Now, traditionally, baseball has featured a fair amount of vacancy, time during which nothing particularly engaging or riveting is happening out on the field. And one of the things that I relished about the games that we witnessed when I was a child was the spaciousness, the opportunity the game afforded for us to engage in some deeper connection, whether it was with me and my son or with me and my siblings and my parents when I was 10 and 12 years old. But regrettably, this unique and, for me at least, highly attractive feature of baseball, its relative serenity, that may be threatened with extinction. Reflecting on our experience at Target Field a few days later, I was suddenly struck by the change that the game has undergone since I sat in Comiskey Park a half-century ago. Back then, baseball was baseball. Between every pitch, between every inning, little, if anything, happened. Apart from the vendors hawking the beer and the peanuts and the hot dogs, there was nothing to distract you from what you saw and heard or didn't see on the diamond. At Target Field, however, practically every inch of surface space is now lit up with LED displays. One's visual field is bombarded continually with promotions, player information, announcements, snippets of entertainment. Little spectacles unfold on the diamond between innings, comical foot races performed by costumed runners. Instant replays are now projected on huge screens in the outfield. And for the ears, there is little relief from the non-stop music and instructions from the PA announcer to stand up and to cheer. Don't get me wrong, I still enjoyed the games at Target Field. But baseball seems to have succumbed to that larger cultural imperative to cram all kinds of stimulus into every nook and cranny of modern life. So wherever we go these days, Anne LeClaire writes, we will be overwhelmed by the noise and the onslaught of information and distraction. Surrounded by clamor, meaningless conversations, all buttressed by our society's supposition that action is preferable to non-action, busy work to idleness. We harbor today the conviction that the void must be filled at whatever cost. As Allen Ginsberg's poem that you heard a moment ago indicated, some days it's just too much. But we humans are remarkably adaptive, and we become habituated to all the clutter and the clatter that presses in upon us almost every waking moment. After a while, we don't know what we would do without it. It begins to feel so familiar that without it we feel naked, exposed. And yet all this plenitude does exact a toll, physically, emotionally, and spiritually. Increasingly, we turn to sedatives and sleep aids to quell the low-level, objectless anxiety that has become a near constant feature of modern life. Tethered to our smartphones, we cannot be alone with ourselves, quiet and self-contained for more than a few minutes at a time. and increasingly unaccustomed to introspection, we find it difficult to search our own hearts. How then can we discriminate between what the marketers and the influence peddlers want us to be and who we need to be? And we seem to be passing on this troubled pattern as a legacy to our children. In an editorial that appeared recently in the New York Times, columnist Frank Bruni cited recent research out of Stanford University. In studying a large sample of 14 to 17-year-olds, researchers found that fewer than half of these teens are sleeping more than 7 hours a night. Not good for a child's physical and emotional health, the study warned. These are bright, ambitious kids from affluent homes who are trapped in a juvenile rat race. And for kids like these, Bruni writes, childhood has been transformed into an insanely programmed, status-obsessed, and sometimes spirit-sapping competition. A lifestyle made all the more frenetic by the tablets and the smartphones that keep kids connected and distracted long after lights out. We need to give our kids more wiggle room, Bruni suggests. We need to give them minutes and hours and days of freedom from the pressure that our hyper-competitive culture has placed upon them. Claire Massad's message to parents is similar. Writing in Harper's Magazine, Massad recalls that as a child, she had plenty of resources, lots of activities and interests to keep her busy, but she also remembered stretches of time when she was utterly unoccupied and, she admits, a little bored, just like many of us were as August wound down and the school year approached. As a mother observing her own children, Massad observes that they lack for nothing even more than I did. And as a consequence, they know nothing of nothingness. They know nothing of nothingness. Is that a bad thing? To be unacquainted with nothingness, with vacancy? Well, it could just be that, as the old hermit told the young merchant in the story you heard earlier, it could just be that this nothingness is where the rich soil of peace and happiness must be planted. And so Massad says, I want my children to embrace doing nothing, to experience the slowing of an afternoon to a near standstill. They need to learn to lie on the lawn and watch ants scale the grass blades. They'd have to stop, be still, and then to wait and wait and wait, allowing time to fatten around them like a dewdrop on the tip of a leaf. And then, and only then, who knows what they might imagine, what they might invent. So think of the amazement, the transcendence that Annie Dillard experienced as she sat silently and selflessly on the bank of Tinker Creek while a muskrat, that notably shy creature, went about its business scarcely an arm's length away. And experiences like this are available to us only when we have trained ourselves to be alone and still and empty and insensible even to the hum of our own consciousness. I have tried to show muskrats to other people, Dillard wrote. It rarely works because most people cannot be still. They cannot slow down. They cannot empty themselves. But there's more at stake here than the opportunity to observe wildlife. For instance, effective listening hinges on our ability to pause long enough to absorb and to understand at a deeper level what is being conveyed to us. It's only by stepping back from a conversation that we can become aware of and put aside all of our preconceived notions, personal biases, and unwarranted assumptions. A quick retort isn't always what is called for. It may move the conversation efficiently forward, but it also preempts a more thoughtful appraisal of the issue at hand. And so one thinks of our conversations around race relations and of the dominant American culture's reluctance to see and to acknowledge implicit bias and white privilege. Our outlook is so bound up with this white racial frame that we need time, We need to give ourselves space to pull all of that apart, leaving an open canvas on which a different picture can be impressed. And we are hardly the first generation to face this particular challenge. I remember reading that even back in the early years of this country's settlement, Europeans would quite often attribute Indian silence during conversation to stupidity or lack of understanding. They just don't get it. But in reality, our European forebears didn't understand Native American patterns of speech, because indigenous peoples distrust opinions that are arrived at too hastily, with too little time allotted for serious reflection. And if our ancestors were uncomfortable with the absence of words, people in today's culture seem positively fearful. Notice what happens in daily conversation, Kay Lindahl writes in The Sacred Art of Listening. It's as though there's an unwritten rule that whenever there is a hint of silence, someone must fill that vacuum with a rush of words. And think about the last time someone called for a moment of silence at a public gathering. The first 10 or 15 seconds, usually pretty comfortable. But after that, 15 seconds, people they get restless, and they cough, and they rustle their orders of service, and they uncross their legs, and they clear their throats. It could well be that our uneasiness with silence, with solitude, with vacancy is founded on a deep-seated fear. It's not just that we want to avoid boredom or the sense of being unoccupied and at loose ends. Yes, our culture does demand that we should always be doing something, and that it's far better to be active than to be idle, because after all, that's how we are taught to justify our existence. But the fear goes deeper than that. In the silence, when our usually dependable defenses are down, self-recrimination, self-doubt can begin to creep in. Stillness, Anne McClare writes, brings us face to face with our complexities and our contradictions, with all those hidden aches and anguishes. And so now, even the Sabbath is no longer exempt from the demands of an over-busy and anxious culture. Our society used to enforce Sabbath observance with closing statutes and blue laws. So most of these are gone now. Maybe they still exist in Kansas. But now what was once mandated by the state is entirely a matter of our own individual initiative. But how many of us appreciate the Sabbath's value, which, as Wayne Mueller explains, is its unflinching uselessness? Nothing will get done on the Sabbath. Not a single item will be checked off any list. No goals will be realized. And the ancient Jews appreciated, for anyone's life to be healthy and balanced, it has to include this vacancy, this fallow time. It had to be informed by emptiness. Otherwise, like a field that is sown too often, forced to produce too much, our lives too lose their vitality. There may be exceptions, but most of us cannot make the best decisions, do our best work, or to sustain good health if we are always in the thick of things. Nor, when we're in the thick of things, can we grieve properly. Stephen Jenkinson, a Canadian noted for his work with hospice patients and with their families, lectured here in the Landmark Auditorium a few days ago. And Jenkinson, in his remarks, said that grief must be learned. It does not come to us naturally. But how does one learn to grieve? By observing others who have figured out how to do it well, Jenkinson said. And those who grieve well resist the temptation to distract themselves. They do not fill up their hours and days with a constant round of activity and mental chatter so that they don't have to deal with what the philosopher Bethany Vaccaro calls the presence of absence. Those who grieve well know that avoidance only delays the inevitable. It does not let us bypass it. In a recent column in the New York Times, Liz Rosenberg reports that after her outwardly healthy husband died unexpectedly in his 50s from a heart attack, she was tempted to do what survivors in our society so often do, as she put it, cover the abyss with trance. Something in the world has been lost, she wrote. We instinctively move forward to fill the gap. You think that you can escape the agony of absence, and for a while you do. But then at some point, the whole house of cards begins to collapse. Belden Lane learned this lesson sitting beside his mother's bed in her final weeks of life. Unlike Liz Rosenberg, who was taken unawares and unprepared, Lane maintained a lengthy vigil at his mother's bedside. And he says that she was working as hard at dying as I have seen her work at anything in her entire life. And there were long periods when nothing passed between them. I listened for the wisdom that she was weaving from the gathered threads of that life, Lane writes, but I valued our time together in silence even more. The opportunity for prolonged grief was somehow good, inviting me to a letting go of other things in my own life. I experienced a keen sense of immediacy in that silence, a vulnerability that sharpened life's intensity, a capacity to discern what was and wasn't important. Now, in the end, the struggle to recover some of the spaciousness that we have lost in our crowded world, a world where inarticulate cries of too much emanate from every quarter, that is a struggle that we cannot afford to abandon. And perhaps this effort should begin with just the simple acknowledgement that it's a matter of restoring a natural and necessary balance, giving both the yin and the yang of our lives their rightful due. Because as the Chinese philosopher Lao Tzu put it 2,500 years ago, we shape clay into a pot, but it's the emptiness inside that holds whatever we want. We hammer wood for a house, but it's the empty inner space that makes it livable. We work with being, but non-being is what we use. I invite you to join me now in the spirit of meditation. So I invite you to settle in for just a moment or two, putting aside all thoughts that annoy, all disturbing memories, all anxious agendas. Put away plans to be made, things to be done, victories to be won. Breathe deeply. Clear the mind of clutter. Sit easy and be at rest. Feel your body recover its balance, your mind its bearings, your spirit its strength. Feel the presence of your companions. Find reassurance in the warmth of their welcome and the support of their caring. May this be a temporary but welcome place of retreat. And may the silence that follows nourish us all in the days ahead. Let us be a community of silence. Blessed be, and amen. no one put an entry, a joy, or a sorrow in our little book. I would just remind you that as you come into the auditorium, if there's something you'd like for us to share that's going on in your own life, this book is always sitting right out the double doors, right outside the auditorium. But we do actually have something of a joy and a sorrow that's not in the book. So Harry, if you would come forward. And Rob, wherever Rob is. There he is. As of last month, Harry, the second longest tenure member of our staff, I being the first, as of July, Harry Carnes retired from his position as our publications czar. And Harry's been doing this work, both in print and digital media, with us for a long, long time, although he started here as a religious education assistant 17 years ago and gradually worked his way up the ladder. Who said FUS is not a place of advancement? But Harry has not only, been an employee with us for a good long time, but, in my working with him, I have found that he has amazing dedication to Unitarian Universalism and to First Unitarian Society. He just simply loves this congregation and loves our movement. And so he has been unfailingly diligent in his work and really, on many, many occasions, gone above and beyond in meeting his responsibilities. So this morning, we want to thank Harry for those 17 years of service. And Rob?
I would just repeat what Michael said. It's been great working with Harry, and I'm hoping that I'll continue to see him around here as a member of our congregation. I'm sure he will not fail us in efforts to help us out. So, yes. On behalf of the congregation,
a little token of our esteem. And as testimony to the fact that Harry probably is not going away anytime soon, the images that were projected up here for the Message for All Ages were ones that he actually provided us with us this morning as a volunteer. So thank you very much, Harry. Our closing words are just a tad bit out of season. As you'll note, this poem by David White is entitled The Winter of Listening. No one but me by the fire, my hands burning red in the palms while the night wind carries everything away outside. All this petty worry while the great cloak of the sky grows dark and intense round every living thing. What is precious inside us does not care to be known by the mind in ways that diminish its presence. What we strive for in perfection is not what turns us into the lit angel we desire. What disturbs and then nourishes, that has everything we need. What we hate in ourselves is what we cannot know in ourselves. But what is true to the pattern does not need to be explained. Inside everyone, there is a great shout of joy waiting to be born. And so now, even with summer so far off, I feel it grow in me now, ready to arrive in the world. All those years listening to those who had nothing to say, all those years forgetting how everything has its own voice to make itself heard, all those years forgetting how easily you can belong to everything simply by listening, and the slow difficulty of remembering how everything is born from an opposite and miraculous otherness. Silence and winter have led me to this otherness. So let this winter of listening be enough for the new life I must call my own. Blessed be, and amen.